Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Unvarnished Football. My name is Michael Jackson of The Game Before the Money, and with me, as always, former NFL executive Upton Bell. This week, we're going to talk about analytics in football. Now, if you've listened to us before, you will know that we aren't big fans of analytics in football or really any sport. Um, but we're going to talk about this today and how analytics, in our opinion, aren't really the whole story. Now, Upton, let's kick this off with a phrase that you've talked about a few times before about overanalysis leads to paralysis. And I can see that sometimes in analytics, or at least it leading to bad decisions. Can you kind of start talking about that?
Well, first, let me start with when I first started out in the scouting department at the Baltimore Colts and then became their personnel director. We used to talk about this all the time, meetings before the draft, discussing it with Don Shula and his coaching staff, and Shula was really big on the coaching staff actually being part of any drafting situation. Today, you don't have that much except for the head coach. But anyway, we talked about, are we overanalyzing the situation? Are we looking and just keep going on about a player and what he can't do instead of what he could do? I remember many times saying, I don't care. I would get in arguments with coaches and say, I don't care what is going on here. I can just tell you all the positive things. I'll give you a perfect example. And I was so glad I wasn't around for analytics. But the case of Mike Curtis, when I saw him at Duke and scouted him for a long time, he would play in the game mainly as a running back, and then they would have him in those days play as a linebacker, kind of a semi-two-way player. I didn't care about him as a running back. I thought he was okay. But when I saw him as a linebacker, I remember telling Shula, this guy is a killer. He's quick, he's fast, and he is like Dick Butkus, super aggressive. And it was my first draft when the personnel director, Keith Molesworth, had a heart attack, and I took over. I was only 25, 26 years old. And Shula said, all right, I put up this whole thing about Curtis. He said, all right, we'll carry him as a running back this year, but your ass better be right. And of course, eventually it proved itself out. I think he belongs in the Hall of Fame. He's one of the great linebackers I've seen, and I had drafted Ted Hendricks, and so I knew what great linebackers were. But anyway, we didn't have analytics. We just had evaluation, and we kept repeating. And it was a famous line from Bucko Kilroy that you overanalyzing things really brings on paralysis. So now, years later, many years later, when you got if somebody had walked into one of our meetings and say, now let me tell you what analytics said, his ass would have been thrown out of the room. It's personal evaluation. And so we have analytics. It's the only where place where I think analytics really can apply to a degree is baseball. And look what it's done to baseball. It's totally ruined it as far as I'm concerned. Basketball, hockey, ridiculous. But football, it's really, I think it's beginning to be more and more and more, and I think it's really kind of ruined football. Look at what's happened with Detroit. and their head coach and the stupid things that he has done to lose playoff games and make decisions based upon analytics. And instead of football is still a game where you have a feel. It's 4th and 1. What are the field conditions? What are the general conditions of the weather? All of the things that make football great and make a coach either go for it or not. And today, more people do go for it, and maybe to a degree that's analytics, maybe it isn't. But too many decisions in football should not be made by analytics. It's not a game that takes analytics.
Right, I agree with you. One of the biggest problems, and you alluded to it, is that analytics really don't take into account the context of the situation. For instance, who's playing left tackle? What kind of a game is a player having? How banged up are they at the time? It's just like, well, if it's 3rd and 1, you got an 85% chance of making it, or whatever. I'm just pulling that out of my head, just hypothetically. But and hypothetical is a good word, because analytics says hypothetically this is more likely to happen. But it doesn't take into account game situations, what particular players are happening. You're grouping everything together. You're grouping the Philadelphia Eagles defense with the Washington Commanders defense. You're grouping the Eagles offense with the Tennessee Titans offense. You're grouping all of that stuff together. And that doesn't work out. You're grouping all the quarterbacks, you're grouping all the running backs, you're grouping all the offensive lines, you're grouping all of those percentages together. And like you said, field conditions matter. Those aren't taken into account. You really got to get a feel for what's going on in the game. And that's what the great coaches did. And some of the great coaches, I'm not going to name names, but some of the great coaches, when they went head-to-head against other great coaches, the differences were how they handled certain game situations. And some handled it much better than others. I said I wasn't going to name names, but I'm going to name two. When it came down to Chuck Noll and Tom Landry, the two of them playing each other, Chuck Noll knew how to better game plan for championship games and manage a championship game while it was in progress compared to the great Tom Landry. Analytics doesn't take that stuff into account. And today, I don't know. Would Chuck Noll have to follow analytics? Would Tom Landry have to follow analytics? How would those situations play out?
I would say that those two, I mean, I didn't have a lot of experience with Landry other than, watching him and, and knowing a lot of people around him. But I did really get to know Chuck Noll. We were great friends for a long time in Baltimore. And to me, he was really a kind of a football intellectual. And I remember saying to him, and I've often repeated it, when I picked him up at the airport when Shula signed him from San Diego as his chief defensive coordinator. They didn't call them coordinators then. And I said, Chuck, it's going to be great for the defense. I said, we've got Unitas. And I said, that's the most important thing, that you'll be able to step in and feel really secure with that. And he said to me, he corrected me immediately. And I knew something. He said, it's Upton. It's not John Unitas that wins the big games. He said it's the defense. And he was so right in so many different ways. And I think Noll might have been tempted, because he was highly intelligent and kind of liked maybe things like that he might have been tempted to do it. But I think he always thought that he knew what was best for a situation that in the end he probably would have rejected it. I do know this, that all of the great coaches that I knew, the Landrys, the Shulas, even before him, Weeb Eubank, Paul Brown, uh, Chuck Noll, look at all those great coaches. They wouldn't have used that because they had a feel for a game and the situation within a game. And I don't want the audience to think that we're two old guys sitting here saying, it used to be good in the old days. It ain't good anymore. I have studied this whole thing in every sport and seen what has happened here. And basically, you look at the Detroit Lions, they have, somebody said on one of the broadcasts, when I'm screaming at the television, Jesus Christ, go for it or don't go for it. And the announcer said, well, do you know that there are 32 people in the analytics department at the Detroit Lions? Now, whether that's true or not, I'm saying, my God, you've got to be kidding me. These people are employed?
And to put it into perspective, NFL rosters at one time were 33. So you got as many people working in the analytics department as would have been on an NFL roster in the mid-1950s. But
this is the thinking, Michael, and what has happened too is, look at the old, kind of not old time owner, but look at the people that own teams then versus people who own them now. First of all, today, and I take it all the way to the top, people today that own teams, if you're not a billionaire many times owner, you can't afford to own an NFL team. Now, when you look at the situation, you're mainly a business person, and what would appeal to you, and maybe I'm going too far out here, what would appeal to you is not necessarily the game so much, is how do you deal in business with analytics? Analytics predicts a lot of things. Predictions on the market, all of the different things. So you have a situation of where somebody comes to the owner. Let's say the owners of Denver, who are new, and they're part of the Sam Walton's group, and they're business people. And if you go to a business person and you say, listen, I know it's football, but we need analytics, just like we need it in our business to predict our future. That's where you're getting all of this. And I do say there are certain sports where analytics, if it's kept under control, is good. But it ain't good for football. It might be good for baseball, but look what it's even happened to baseball now. I mean, so many of these teams, with the exception like of the Dodgers, who have all the superstars, they're relying on how to lift the ball up, how to do this in this situation, how to do that. And it's all analytics driven. And I would tell you, much of the Red Sox front office, if you want to call it that, are all analytical people.
What's a great point that you made was, as the business model of the NFL changed, and as we've gone from family ownership to corporate ownership, analytics gets introduced because corporations are run on analytics. And now football teams, on and off the field, are being run by analytics as well. That's an excellent point that you brought up, and I think there probably is not a coincidence there that the growth of analytics is in part because of the business part of the NFL changing. Now, it's always been a business, but it's gone from a family-run business to a corporation type business now.
Well, bottom line, I will ask this, which is a, a bigger problem as far as I'm concerned. Probably not from an ownership or from a commissioner standpoint, because they're making millions of dollars each team. But if you look, you've got 32 teams, and you look at the situation and say to yourself, how many of those teams, analytics driven or not, how many of them are really good? Well, maybe, in my opinion, maybe 16. And what you
I
have
think you're
now
being
is,
generous. I
yeah,
think
well,
you're being generous.
I'm trying to be generous enough so people don't say, well, these guys don't know what they're talking about. But I do. I really study it. I got 3 sets. I know exactly what's going on. I've looked at film for years and watched replays on games, and I can just tell you what, even in drafting now, analytics, they pull all this stuff out. Just the other day, it's on another sport. Brad Stevens, the general manager of the Celtics, who used to be their coach, he was asked directly in a situation, because when they traded one of their best players, Jaylen Brown, and got nothing but a couple of draft choices and a broken down player that's 36 years old and had to take off time from doing drugs last year, he was asked, how much did analytics play in this whole thing? And he said, not a great deal, but he was very careful how he said it. And so they have an analytics department. For what? You know, they just, if it was analytics or if it was part of the decision, they just got nothing in return for one of the best players in all of basketball. Zero. So you can really outthink yourself here. I guarantee you I can walk into an NFL team tomorrow and tell you I might not be up to date with all the stuff that you have now, but I can walk in and I can sit down and look at the film and then go out and watch a player practice and tell you, without analytics, what I think, whether he can make the team or not, and how good he will be. It's still to a degree a guessing game, but you can't take away the human ability to judge somebody and forget all the other stuff. Look at the film, watch the player in practice, watch the player in games, especially in college. And if you can't make a decision on that, then forget it. Analytics is not going to help you.
And I've seen a lot of situations. Again, it's taking things into context and having a feel for what's going on. Analytics can't do that. AI, which is becoming a part of the decision-making process, also can't do that. I can see analytics being useful in helping in a decision-making process when you're unsure, but eventually you got to go with your gut, and eventually you got to, in music we call it, you got to read the room, okay, about what people want to hear and what's going to work. And it's the same thing in football. You got to read the room. And I remember at the end of last season, I think I told you, I was watching the Bills, and I forget who they were playing, but the Bills scored. They were driving at the end of the game, and I said to my nephews who were watching the game with me, I said, okay, here's what's going to happen. The Bills are going to score a touchdown, and McDermott is going to go for 2 and lose the game. And he's not thinking that the division championship and their whole ability to stay in the division championship race depends on whether they win this game or not. And that's exactly what happened. And the Bills ended up losing by 1 point. And they basically let the division championship come down to one single play off the analytics and off of whatever McDermott was thinking. So that's a situation where, one, the Bills are at home, okay? The old rule, there were old rules that people used to go by. Old rule number one, a big one, was go for the win on the road, go for the tie at home. That is as old as I can remember. And probably you can remember that one for sure, having been in the game for so long. So why are you going for the win at home? And why are you going for it when you have all the momentum? And why are you going for it when your defense is playing so well? Why are you doing all those things? And when you're basing it on analytics, again, it doesn't get a feel for the game. And I'm singling out Sean McDermott here, but I've seen many, many teams do similar things. And they end up losing games that they really should have won because they're doing the math and they're letting calculators make decisions that really, you can't do that in football. There's no calculation for somebody knocking somebody's block off on the line of scrimmage. That's what matters, and there's no analytics for that.
Well, look, the perfect example is how many chances have the Detroit Lions in the last 4 or 5 years, and I do like their coach a lot. How many times have they lost big games because of the analytics end of it? And I just sit here and look at my set and say, "You stupid bastard! Or what? Why are you doing? And pardon my language. Why are you doing this?" I scream at the set. What the hell is going on? You played a great game so far. You've got the ground game going. You've got the clock going. You've got everything with you. You're not only that, you're ahead. Why are you doing this? Why are you going on fourth down for it when you don't need to? Kick the damn field goal. That's one thing that I can remember really about Paul Brown and going to his first training camp in 1950. Is listening to him preach, because they had one of the great field goal kickers of his time, Lou the Toe Groza, who's in the Hall of Fame. They had a great running game with Marion Motley, and of course they had the Hall of Fame, again a Hall of Famer in Otto Graham, automatic Otto as they call him. And I can remember in the practices, Brown screaming out, "Time to on for the field goal, kick the field goal," and he did it in every game. And that's think about the first championship game in 1950 between the Browns and the Rams, two great teams of their time. And who won the game? It was won by a field goal by Lou the Toe Groza, 31-28. I was there and said everything played out perfectly. Now, if you had analytics involved, who knows what would have happened?
Well, and especially on Otto Graham's great final 2-minute drive there at the end of the 1950 NFL Championship to get the Browns in position to win. That's another overlooked thing. But again, analytics has a lot of issues. And for people putting so much weight on it, I have so many problems with it. And one more thing I'd like to talk about that's a failure of analytics is the hypothetical nature of it. And this is driving me nuts in all sports. Is you get online and you look at statistics, and all of a sudden statistics aren't statistics. Okay? If a guy gains 1,000 yards rushing, okay, then there are all these other statistics saying, like, no, it really wasn't 1,000 yards, because if we adjust it one way or another, he really should have had 1,200 yards, or he really should have had 800 yards. No, that's not what happened. That's hypothetical. That's not what happened. Dude got 1,000 yards, okay? This team put up this many points over the season. This team won this many games over the season. Those are the cold, hard facts. And that's what life is, cold, hard facts. It's not, well, let's hypothesize about what would have happened if this would have been happening, or if field conditions were perfect, or whatever. The other one that's really driving me nuts is baseball's win over replacement that's putting people in the Hall of Fame. You know, Ted Simmons got in the Hall of Fame because he's got a high wins over replacement, a WAR, wins above replacement. Anybody who was watching baseball in the 70s and 80s can tell you that Steve Garvey, Dale Murphy, and Don Mattingly all were better players. We would all rather have those players on our team than Ted Simmons. And I like Ted Simmons, but, you know, comparatively, this is what's driving me nuts about analytics and these adjusted statistics that go into it. They're not real statistics. They're hypotheticals.
See, to me, baseball is already gone. It's over in baseball. It's infecting basketball. It'll never infect hockey, as far as I'm concerned. But football could be saved. But I think it's getting to the point of where it might be over for football too. And look at not only how many people are employed in the analytics department, but you also have salary cap specialists. You the two ends. One the business side, where now you have somebody that has to come in with a group of other people to make good money to tell you how to manage your salary cap. I can tell you how to manage your salary cap. So between that and the analytics, and then you have 45,000 coaches, and you still only have 53 players. It's unbelievable. But I think if enough coaches put their foot down, or just ignore it to a degree, I think even though football is on life support, the heart is ready to stop. Maybe we could, go in and have invasive ceremony or invasive surgery and kind of save it. But right now, it's on its way out the door, and hopefully there'll be enough new coaches, maybe, that could stop it.
Well, and you bring up some hope there about this analytics nonsense getting tossed out. And part of that hope is the NFL is a copycat league. We hear that all the time. And if somebody starts winning, let me change it. When somebody starts winning by ignoring all of these hypotheticals and going by cold hard facts and focusing on straight ahead, hard-nosed football rather than wishy-washy calculator football. When people start winning like that, then the rest of the league probably will slowly toss it out.
We'll see.
We'll see. Now, earlier, switching topics, earlier you were talking, you mentioned the Broncos earlier. And a story Broncos related was Sean Payton, the head coach general manager of the Broncos, potentially discussing with Bill Belichick about stepping aside a little bit and letting Bill Belichick break the wins total over your former boss, Don Shula. And then Payton, then after Belichick would ostensibly break the record, then Belichick would retire, and Payton would come back. Now you've got kind of some inside knowledge on that potential agreement, and you're connected with the writer who broke the story, from my understanding. Can you give us kind of a background on that?
First and foremost, I contacted Seth Wickersham, who broke the story, and works at ESPN. I had contacted him originally because he wrote one of the great books, maybe the greatest book I've ever read, on quarterbacks and the art of quarterbacking in the NFL in particular. And he is in one of my collections at the University of Massachusetts. So when I saw the story break, I immediately emailed them and said, congratulations. And Wickersham is a guy that doesn't BS anybody. I mean, he's not going to come out and write anything unless he has the absolute facts. And so I had emailed him and said, what a story. And if there had been anything that was untrue in it, or anything that was misunderstood about it, he would have got back to me. But he got back to me and just said, with a big exclamation point, thanks, which is all I needed to really confirm what really happened here. Now, let me go back to Don Shula, who I consider, not Belichick, not anybody with the exception of Paul Brown, Don Shula, the greatest coach of all time. And the reason that I say that is he won with Unitas, he won with Marino, but he also won with a running game. He always was able to adjust. It wasn't just one person doing one thing for his whole career. In Shula's case, when he left Baltimore and went to Miami, he saw that Zaga kick was really, and a really good offensive line, were really the key to them winning. Yes, Greasy's in the Hall of Fame, and so's Paul Warfield. But it wasn't a passing game. It was a running game with a very effective passing game when they needed it. He always was able to adjust versus a guy like Belichick, who was a great coach, is a great coach, but as far as I'm concerned, there are two really great coaches of all time. One is Paul Brown, who changed the game completely in many different ways, including off the field with the 40-yard dash and the scouting stuff and the IQ test and all the other things. But Shula was a guy that always was able to fit his talent to what was needed. And in the case of the Dolphins, his record, with all of the things Belichick, unlike Shula, Belichick had probably the greatest quarterback of all time, although I would put Unitas in the running there too, and Tom Brady. So Belichick was a defensive kind of guru or genius, but he also had the greatest quarterback, considered the greatest quarterback of all time, and also until lately, he really drafted well. But with all of the things that he did, with all the winning the Patriots had, he still needed how many games? 15, 17 games still more, and this includes playoff games, to break Shula's record. So I say whether he broke the record or not, I still don't consider him a greater coach than Don Shula. But anyway,
well, and just to fill people in, Shula coached for a number of 14 game regular seasons, then 16 game regular seasons. Belichick coached his entire career with 16 game regular seasons. and then I guess he was
What
part of the
playoff game?
17 and the 17 game regular seasons, and then yes, adding on to it, the playoffs have been expanded, so there were more playoff games as well.
And Michael, that was perfect the way you inserted that because there is a big difference here. But to me, and I've studied all the great coaches, and I was around them as a kid, many of them. Um, Shula was really an innovator. He had, when he came to Baltimore, he was a defensive kind of guru genius from Detroit that put up all those great Detroit defenses behind people like Joe Schmidt. But when he got to Baltimore, he was able to transfer to offense. In fact, I can remember one day, no, for a week, Norm Van Brocklin, who was kind of close to Shula, said, I'd like to come up and see if we can spend a week together kind of brainstorming. You know, Van Brocklin was really a great offensive mind, but he needed to learn defense and vice versa. So they came up, and I remember them watching film together and talking and being around them for a week. And I will tell you this. I remember walking out, and I don't know whether it was the coaches or who else was in there. I said, I always thought of Shula as a defensive kind of genius of mine. I said, I've changed my mind. I think he knows more about offense than Van Brocklin. And I just remember, first of all, watching those two guys talk, look at film, discuss offenses and defenses. It was like watching Winston Churchill with Franklin Roosevelt or something. It was that type of meeting and that type of week that really made me think more and more deeply about football and its meaning. And I look at what he did, and yet here's Belichick now trying to hang on to break the record of a guy that I think was much better than him and dealt with a lot more difficult situations. But so now this crazy scheme. Did you ever hear anything like this? I haven't.
Well, as a matter of fact, what this reminded me of, for better or for worse, and all y'all can judge how relevant this is, but I do remember when I was young and had just first started watching football, and Franco Harris was climbing the ranks for most all-time yardage. Jim Brown, who held the record at the time, was upset because he thought Franco Harris went out of bounds too often. And Jim Brown was threatening to come out of retirement and ostensibly searching for ways to come out of retirement to add to his yardage total. Okay, so this might not be unprecedented in certain ways, or people thinking about it at least. Now, I know some of you, there's probably a few of you out there who remember Jim Brown and how serious he was, I don't know. But he was making a point, and he was upset. He didn't think Franco Harris had the same toughness that he did. And he didn't want Franco Harris to have the all-time rushing record. Now, eventually, Franco Harris fell short of breaking the record. And of course, Walter Payton broke the record and held it for many, many years. And
Emmitt Smith too.
And now Emmitt Smith broke it. And again, we're going to wrap this up. A lot of people use these adjusted statistics and analytics and whatever and say that, well, Emmitt Smith had a better offensive line, for crying out loud. I mean, Emmitt Smith owns the NFL rushing record, okay? That's the record. Doesn't matter who was blocking for him. If Larry Allen was better than Noah Jackson, okay, I get it, okay? I get it, but still, Emmitt Smith did it. His body held up. He had the talent to do it. He was a great enough player to do it. Not everybody could have done it behind that offensive line. I couldn't have done it. You couldn't have done it. Okay?
Well,
Vegas, I hate to pick out Vegas Ferguson, but for some reason that's the first running back that came into my head. Vegas Ferguson and 1,000 other running backs wouldn't have done it either. So
well, I can tell you this, Michael. I've seen every running back going back into the 40s. Jim Brown is the greatest running back I've ever seen, inside, outside. Remember, in those days, you could kick a guy in the head. You could beat him when you were down. Marion Motley before Jim Brown, and then Jim Brown and other players afterwards. You get a guy on the ground and you use the N-word, the intimidation. I mean, today, any of these players that abuse Jim Brown would be thrown out of the game immediately. And I can tell you, with the wide open offenses today, I mean, Jim Brown ran against like 7-man lines, and inside, outside, speed, ability. I've never seen a guy like that. And I still say to this day, there is not one running back, including Sweetness, Waller, Payton, or Emmitt Smith, or any of them. The closest backs that I've ever seen to Jim Brown.
I have a guess, and that player played for the Rams and later the Colts,
right,
is my guess.
Right. Eric Dickerson.
Yeah.
Eric Dickerson came the closest to Jim Brown, and to me, if you ask me 1-2, it'd be Jim Brown 1 and Eric Dickerson number 2. He was 6'4" and ran straight up, could run away from people, run over them, run around them, do anything. They're my 1-2 is the greatest running backs I've ever seen.
Now, I'm not old enough to remember Jim Brown, so my number 1 is Walter Payton. And number 2 would probably be Eric Dickerson. I made a top 10 list on the GameBeforeTheMoney.com many years ago. I think I ranked Dickerson about 3 or 4. I think there was a fair amount of time where I thought Barry Sanders was probably the second best, but Eric Dickerson, I think I would rank above Barry Sanders now. Emmitt Smith is great. I still think Emmitt Smith, as far as running backs in my time, which I started watching in 1976, which is after O.J. Simpson's prime, I will say. Emmitt to me is still top 5, and certainly top 10. He's way up there. Emmitt had a really good combination of power, speed, and toughness. That's very rare. Now, is he better than everybody he's outrushed? No. But is he a premier all-timer? To me, unequivocally, yes.
I will finish by saying the one exception that I would make, if he remained healthy, I think Bo Jackson would have owned every record in the NFL.
Bo Jackson might be in 2 Halls of Fame without his injury. He might have been in both the baseball and football Hall of Fame. I totally agree with you. Bo Jackson was, and I think I put him in my top 10 actually, that I did, because Bo Jackson was an amazing talent.
Anything he could do, anything. So the speed, I mean, just amazing. But you know the saddest thing about today, the running back is obsolete. Nobody wants a running back. No, how many running backs do you really have? You know who is the best running back in the NFL?
It's got to be the king. It's got to be
No,
Derrick Henry.
the best running back in the NFL is a quarterback. It's Josh
You're
Allen.
going with Josh Allen. All right, all right, all right, all right. You know,
He can throw. He can run. He's as big as the king. I mean, it's unbelievable. But the sad part of it is there no the, other than King Henry, how the quarterback has been downgraded because it's all passing.
and we can get into that in a future episode. I
Yep.
would like to talk great running backs and the demise of the running back as a position in the next couple of weeks. Let's plan on that. And
We will do it. But you know what? Um, let me again. I know we're going way too long today, but let me go again with a guy that everybody has forgotten that was a great running back at UCLA and I believe was the most valuable player in the Chicago Tribune All-Star game, and that's Jackie Robinson.
there is footage of Jackie Robinson playing in the Chicago All-Star game of him scoring a touchdown. Look, Jackie Robinson could have been an NFL player had it not been for the color line. In fact, I think George Hallis wanted to sign him. And Jackie Robinson actually was more famous as a football player than a baseball
Correct.
player before the Dodgers signed him. On the
That
West Coast, he was a very, very well known football player.
that backfield of Kenny Washington, Jackie Robinson, and Woody Strode is still one of the greatest people that have a chance. Go on to YouTube and take a look at that UCLA backfield and what they did, and you will see maybe one of the greatest backfields, even at that time or in college football history. And I saw the day that Woody Strode and Kenny Washington ran on the field for practice for the Rams, 1947.
Okay, we got to talk about that because we're going to do a
Right.
training camp episode too. So
Yeah.
we got to bring that one up in the training camp episode. And so everybody, you got a little preview about some things that we're going to talk about to come. Obviously, a lot of great stories that you won't hear anywhere else. A lot of great commentary and perspectives that you won't hear anywhere else because we are all about football. No gossip, no filler, no fluff, just football. Thanks again for listening to this week's edition of Unvarnished Football. Have a great week.